the information ecosphere that we live in right now favors a lack of attention span, which favors like less time to exist in complex arguments or complex ideas.
Laura, thank you so much for the time. I really do appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for watching and engaging.
Well, I mean, how can you not engage this film? Democracy Under Siege, a documentary about the Constitution, the Trump administration, so many things. It demands a response, and I'm speaking with Laura Nix, the director of the film. Laura, where did the film come from?
So I made the film as part of a series called Draw for Change. It was funded in Europe, actually, not by America. So it was made with funding from German and Belgian television. And the series was about six female cartoonists around the world who each are addressing an issue in their country. And they asked me if I would direct the US episode. And with Ann Telnis, who's a double Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist, we decided that the issue that in our country that needed to be addressed was democracy. So the mandate I was kind of given was to explain the crisis in US democracy to Europeans before the 2024 election. So we finished the film and screened it actually in Europe in 14 territories, but right before the election happened. And the film leads up to the moment of that.
I would love to talk to you about the cartoons in this film with Anne and everything that she produces. It gives voice in ways that traditional journalism and writing doesn't seem to do. And I think even she says that images are so powerful because they don't rely on words. What is it about the political cartoonists that you think that really helps drive drive the point home in ways that we can't otherwise?
I think political cartoons give you an outlet for emotion.
Hmm.
So many of the issues that are being discussed in the film are deeply infuriating. They are heartbreaking. They are they're crazy making. That's what what we're dealing with is when you've got powerful forces that are suppressing the will of people and or causing harm to people, which is what we have experienced in the country's history and we are reliving now, it creates feelings about that, right? And I interviewed people who are brilliant at analyzing what's going on, but they're giving you this information in a, in a verbal, more traditional way. Now, I mean, some of them also have great charisma in the way that they do it, but it's it's more analytic. And cartoons paired with that analysis give you a different feeling. It allows you to see, I think, your own emotions about it being expressed on the screen. So, and it also makes it easier, I think, to digest some of this historic analysis as well. It kind of Anne's images make the medicine go down in a way.
Yeah, it really does. And you use them well in this film to help give life to all those facts and figures that you delve into across the way. It's a fascinating journey because, like we said, this isn't a film about Trump, even though he's heavily featured, and it does as we build up to the election for sure. But you're really delving into the power or the Constitution at the outset of this film. And it is an interesting conversation going on about whether or not the Constitution should be updated today. And I think there's a comment that says that there are many people that view the Constitution as the Bible itself, which I thought was fascinating. Um, but can you talk about that and this the way the role that the Constitution plays in American politics and whether or not something like that can be updated? I would say I'm going to use the term easily, but I don't mean structurally. I mean publicly.
Um, I grew up going to school and learning about American democracy and being told over and over again, it's the greatest one in the world, and we have the greatest constitution in the world. And we certainly have one of the very first constitutions in the world, and it was radical at its time. It was a very important document when it was first written. But it was written at a very, very long time ago. And since then, human rights have been updated, and we believe that people should be able to vote if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, for example. And the Constitution doesn't actually give anybody the right to vote. I didn't totally understand that until I made this film. It doesn't explicitly transfer voting rights to every citizen. And the reason for that is because they were limited. And so it has language and a kind of rhetoric about equality for all. But then when you read the fine print, it's very clear that it's not everybody. And that's become even more true when you consider what just happened last week with the gutting of the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965. Now, millions of Black people in this country have just been disenfranchised from the vote again because of the redistricting process that's happening. So it's hard to imagine how broken the US Constitution is because everybody has this idea about it. It is treated like the Bible. It is spoken about like it's this haloed document. A place like Norway updated its constitution over 600 times. We have not done that. We are limited in our ability to pass amendments and change things. And so we're stuck with this very broken old system. And I wanted to make that clear to people because otherwise, I think it's very hard for people to understand why can't you get climate legislation passed? Why can't you pass gun control laws? Why can't you have reproductive freedoms passed? The reason for that is because the majority will of the people is not represented through the current system. And you have to kind of get into the weeds about like how Senate proportionality works and how the Electoral College works and all these crazy things that we have that were instituted at the very beginning that are still with us today. And that is why the will of the people is not being expressed through legislation, even though the majority of people in America want these things. So I think that it gives people around the world this misunderstanding that somehow Americans don't care about that stuff. And that's actually not the truth.
Well, I mean, I'm not American, but I appreciated this to explain the Electoral College to me and how it developed because that's been a question I've had for years. I mean, I started to understand how it works even a few years back. But the complexities of it and talking about, how these things have been created and built. I mean, this film is excellent for that, helping understand those sorts of things. I wanted to talk to you about discourse
Mhm.
a little bit as well, because one of the things I think this film also does very, very well is talk about how the discourse between political parties and Republicans, Democrats it seems to have fundamentally shifted, maybe forever. And I would love to know in your mind, how did that begin, and is it change? Can it or I don't know, say this? How am I going to say this well? But is it changed forever? I guess is the best question to ask.
It's certainly changed deeply for now. And because our system is based on two parties, which by the way is not in the Constitution, the founders never really understood that parties were going to be a part of this, and didn't understand how it could be reflected now in the way that it is, the way that it's been manifested. Um, when you look at what the reality, for instance, of both parties is, they're umbrellas for hugely divergent points of view. I mean, the splits within the Democratic Party around taxes, around foreign policy, around you name it. Like there's huge. I mean, I think the party's pretty much on the same page when it comes to gun control, but like even climate legislation, there's not like a complete unifying opinion around like how it should be dealt with. And same thing with the Republicans. There's aspects of that party that are much more religious, and then there's people who are more, concentrated on fiscal policy. And so there are these umbrellas that are pretty leaky in a way, right? And so I think that when you get to a moment where we are right now, where an extreme part of the wing of the GOP has taken control. That's where it's like broken beyond a new level. And because we don't really have the mechanics for third parties or other parties to take place, so that more of these disparate points of view can be represented, it gets clamped down between this very basically like false dichotomy between right and left because there's a whole portion of the center that is not being reflected at all. And that's part of what we're struggling with at the moment, and it really contributes to the dysfunction that we're experiencing.
We like our labels. It's like, oh, you're red, oh, you're blue, and and lumping everybody in the same sorts of things, as we see. And I think you're making a great point, you know.
Well, and I think too that, this isn't just limited to the US either. I think
No.
that the information ecosphere that we live in right now favors a lack of attention span, which favors like less time to exist in complex arguments or complex ideas. And so people kind of gravitate towards very simplistic responses to like complex social problems that can't easily just be boiled down to something really simple. And and also the kind of sensationalism of social media that kind of, attaches itself to that. So I think we've got a discourse problem in our current moment. And this is true for, I can't speak to what it's like in Canada. I'm working on a documentary right now about far-right parties in Europe, and it's also happening in other places other than here. And so we have some commonality, I think, with this information issue and the way in which media is being disseminated and received, and its impact on politics.
Yeah, I think Canada likes to think that they've got it all together. We don't. I think, um, but you know what? You're making a great point here, and this is a film too that deals with um, the question of truth, and it's obviously we know over the last 10 years the word truth and versus fake news, if to not to put too fine a point on it, have really become vocal conversations. Um, and I guess I would ask, like, given you've said this, I mean, you're right about the information age that we live in. Does truth even exist anymore, or how do we know what that is anymore? Because we're just constantly bombarded with information and saying, no, no, believe me. I think, it's especially as we see in some forms of the government.
I think that's an excellent question. And um, we are at a moment where, I like to think of it as, you are what you watch, you are what you read, in the same way that you are what you eat, right? Like we grew up with this message, you are what you eat.
Mm.
And we really do have to be very conscious about our media diet. Where are our information sources coming from? What are the ingredients? How did they get there? How did it become that way? Who's writing what and who's making what image to go along with the meaning that's being disseminated through the TV show, the social media post, the article in the paper, right? And um, I think that teaching media literacy to young people is like more important than ever before because young people need to start to understand what they're watching and reading and ingesting and how it's affecting their worldview. And we just finished an event with the Media and Democracy Project, who does just that. And we're going to be engaging with other media literacy groups in the U.S. around this film to kind of help young people kind of get their heads around that. But people my age need to do that too. And AI just throws a whole wrench into the works. I mean, I can't tell you how many times somebody sent me something or I've sent something to somebody else and we're like, oh God, that's AI. Like, because we're now at another level of being able to bend what the truth is. And when people say we're living in a post-truth world, they're not wrong. And it just means that we have to be unbelievably diligent about researching many sources, looking at what the sources are, so that we can start to understand what the truth is about any given fact.
and care for that. Like I think, it's so easy for us to just to latch on to something and just hold it and say this is what it is because we don't care enough to look. And
Yeah, but then also the system itself is set up so the lies are free and you have to pay for the truth too. That's the other part of it, right? Is that there's an incredible amount of free media that people are getting their eyes and their hands on. And if you want to actually get to the truth, you've got to subscribe to something that's going to give it to you. And I think that's something we also have to get our heads around that if, this type, a certain type of investigative journalism costs money. You have to pay for a newspaper that's giving you that kind of reporting. You're not just going to get that for free, like on TikTok every day. Sometimes maybe, but um, free media is never free, is another thing that we've learned. It's being paid for somehow, some way with your attention span. And investing in the truth is another piece of this that I think is really important.
absolutely, absolutely. I think that's core to democracy in and of itself.
Yeah.
As we for in particular with this film, like this is so important to the very soul and core of what a film like this is trying to get at. Which I genuinely appreciate. Laura, I know we're running out of time, but I would just before we wrap, what do you hope audiences take away from Democracy Under Siege?
I hope that anybody who watches it comes up with a more complex understanding of how the US system works. And Americans need to learn that. Anybody in the world who's interested in it could always learn more, and has an awareness of how this is not new. Um, there's a system right now that is stumbling along and doing its thing, and there's so much attention that's paid to Trump and what Trump is doing and what Trump says, and it's an industry in and of itself, and there's a history to this, and he would not be able to get away with this if there was not a system in place that allowed for it to happen. And these things that we deeply believed in to be fail-safe, like this system of checks and balances and congressional authority, it's all just being flattened at the moment. Here, we need to become more aware of our own power. No one's coming to save us. It's going to have to be Congress isn't doing anything to save us. Gave up on the Supreme Court a while ago. We're now at a point where we have to do that work ourselves and stand up. We need as much support from around the world as we possibly can, and we have to keep looking for the right sources of information to be able to get deeper understandings of what we face as citizens of the world now.
I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the film. Thank you so much for your time, Laura. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Laura Nix, director of Democracy Under Siege. Have a great day. Honestly, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye bye.